I'm delighted to say we're now joined by Arwa Damon, the founder and president of INARA. That's a non-profit organisation which has been providing medical and mental care for children in Gaza. Arwa herself has been in Gaza several times during the war. Arwa, thank you very much indeed for your company. Perhaps not too much shock from this World Health Organization report, but are you surprised about the extent of the nature of those injuries and the rehabilitation that will be needed because of them?
Well, I think the depth and breadth and scope of the bombings and the injuries sustained by Gazans has been surprising and continues to be surprising and shocking because it's at a scale that we have not witnessed before, especially not in such a condensed time frame. And when it comes to the length of rehabilitation that is required, sadly, no, that is not something that is surprising because my organization actually focuses on exactly that. We take on the cases of children that require multiple surgeries, as well as extensive physical and psychological help. The thing that is very crucial to remember is that if these children or others do not receive the long-term care that they require, these injuries can end up having permanent or result in permanent disability. So if we're talking about something like burn injuries, a child will require multiple surgeries as they're growing into adulthood to deal with burn injuries so that that burn itself does not end up being severely restrictive on that child's ability to move. When we're talking about amputations, for example, and most people may not be aware of this, but a person who has lost a limb will, generally speaking, especially a child, require around 5 to 7 surgeries as they continue to grow. And so this idea that this number of people, especially children, are being injured in this devastating way in an environment where they're not even able to access the most basic of medical health care, it is tragic, but no, it's not surprising. And children and women and others are going to continue to suffer in catastrophic ways if we're not able to provide them and continue to be blocked by Israel from providing them with the medical care that they need.
Well, indeed, and the World Health Organization report went into some detail that the impact would be now and for years to come. Can you just put into context for us, having been in Gaza and experienced it yourself, how challenging it will be, not just for everybody in Gaza, but particularly those with long-term injuries, given the state of the hospitals and given that the health service is on its knees?
Let me describe a couple of examples of what I saw on my most recent trip there, and I just got out of Gaza about 10 days ago. There is a little girl in Al-Aqsa Hospital. She was about a year and a half. And they weren't able to stabilize her because they were missing a small piece of plastic. It's a tracheostomy piece, and it was needed so that they could then fit the breathing tube into her, but they did not have that in her size. They were missing pediatric sizes of this. There was a boy who was about 12 years old in the bed right next to her who had sustained severe burns. Now, he did not need to be in the ICU. But he was in the ICU because the hospital did not have sufficient bandages to be able to regularly clean his injuries, which then resulted in a blood infection and early sepsis. In Nasser Hospital, for example, they have a shortage of pediatric-sized cannulas, which is basically the IV needed, the needle needed to be able to put an IV into the smallest of patients. These are the sort of shortages that the medical system there is lacking, not to mention, more broadly speaking, anesthesia, numbers of beds, so on and so forth. So what we're already seeing is injuries that do not need to be life-threatening beginning to threaten, and actually over the last few months from the get-go, threatening people's lives. And unless there is some way to alter this dynamic, unless there is a way for sufficient pressure to be put on Israel to allow the entry of the required medical equipment, medicine, and all other humanitarian supplies that are needed at this stage, Gazans are not going to be killed just by the bombs. We're going to start seeing a significant and gutting increase of people who die because of lack of access to medical care because of the spread of disease, and many other things that at this stage we probably can't even begin to imagine.
And that brings us back to the long-term implications of the war. I mean, clearly generations are going to be affected for some time to come. I mean, what do you think life's going to look like for Gazans in the years ahead?
I mean, Gaza is gone. And it's not an exaggeration to say that, because Gaza has largely been reduced to rubble. And Gazans themselves are both physically and psychologically destroyed. And any sort of future for Gaza to sort of begin to alter this horror that we're seeing there right now is going to have to be some sort of multi-tiered approach, because Gaza doesn't just need to be physically rebuilt. It needs to be psychologically rebuilt. It's going to need to be socially rebuilt. Every single aspect of life, every single thing that makes, life what it is, has been taken away from Gazans. And unless there is a very concerted and clear international plan to rebuild Gaza, to allow people to begin to psychologically not heal, because you don't fully heal from this kind of trauma, but be able to move through this pain and suffering that they have endured, it's hard to see anything except for that image of rubble that I have in front of my eyes right now, even if as I am speaking with you. This image of how buildings on either side of every single street are just cascading down into what was at one point in time a 2-lane road, and people emerging from this rubble, trying to live in it, on top of it, and then trying to move around and just get their daily basics, whether it's trying to figure out where to get food for the day, or where to get their water allotment, or where to even begin to try to get medical assistance for all the number of diseases that are emerging inside. I mean, what's happened in Gaza defies logic, and the scale of it is astronomical.
Arwa, we'll have to leave it there, but we do really appreciate you coming on the News Hour. Arwa Damon, their founder and president of INARA, a non-profit organisation providing medical and mental care for kids in Gaza.